Hey folks, Papa Boris here reviewing my second game in the Champions Second Cup. This is up against Elesie, a very strong player. I was pretty nervous going into this one. And starting off, Elesie picked the Brewmaster over the Jailer and the Nemesis, which I think is fine, although maybe technically the Jailer is a more important piece. I can understand wanting something that's a little bit more offensively capable. Then the top deck is the Protector, so as a second player, I'm not getting the best of luck here. I have to take the Jailer. And then I'm looking to see what top deck comes out. And what comes out is a Manipulator. So it starts off looking like I'm the unlucky one because I end up with a not very explosive first pick and definitely a middling second pick, while my opponent top decks a Claw. So I thought I was going to be in trouble this game. Now, after the Claw pops out, the Illusionist appears. So again, I get a little bit of a break. After my opponent got a good top deck, I do as well. I move up with my pieces. I get my Manipulator out of the line of sight of the Claw. I could have also instead just moved the Claw, but there wasn't really a good place to move it. I don't want to move it next to the Brewmaster, and I also don't want to move it up the board. So I figured, you win. This kind of interesting positioning kind of makes it harder for me to use my Manipulator effectively. So I just moved the Manipulator towards my opponent's king, and then of course I grabbed the Illusionist. I'm not sure why I put it here, to be honest. Maybe I didn't want my opponent's Brewmaster developing in the most natural way, although the Brewmaster can just go here and the Claw goes here, and that's also pretty natural. I'm not entirely sure if I am justified in doing that. So, at this point, the luck swings my way because now out pops the Assassin, so my opponent is forced to take something a little bit janky. The Protector actually is not unreasonable. It's a good insurance policy in case the Bruiser pops out. And it is currently relevant against the Illusionist and the Manipulator. But my opponent decides to grab the Assassin after developing some pieces, which I think I would have done as well. Assassin's more fun. And then I get the Hermit and Cub. So even though this draft kind of looked crappy for me, where I began with the Jailer and the Manipulator, then I got the Illusionist and the Cub as top decks, whereas my opponent got the Claw and the Brewmaster, which are fine, but then she got the Assassin as a top deck. And then after I do the usual swappity, bring up my Jailer to my opponent's active pieces and just shove another piece towards the enemy leader. My Manipulator is not really doing a lot of manipulating. I grab the Hermit and Cub, which is obviously very, very strong. And then the Rider pops out. And the thing is, we've already seen a lot of bricks. We've already seen the Assassin, the Manipulator, the Nemesis, of course, and the Protector have been here the whole time. So there's not that many bricks left in the deck. A lot of what's in the deck is really good. My opponent could have definitely gotten better stuff than the Rider. There's, a Wanderer in there. There's a Bruiser in there. So the fact that just a Rider came out, I feel like I was pretty lucky. And even though it started off kind of lame, all in all, I think I got luckier in the draft than my opponent did. But let's see how this goes. My opponent shuffles the king underneath the Assassin, starts to move the Assassin towards my leader, and then, maybe with some hesitation, moves her pieces closer to my leader, even though it does mean putting both of her active pieces right next to my Jailer, which is the place they don't want to be. She recruits the Rider. I'm not 100% sure if anything really significant happened in the opening phase of this game. Maybe some things could have been technically a little bit better. For my skill level, this just seemed like, people moving up their pieces and calling it a day. This is what I would say is the first critical move of the game for me. It's not a huge, mind-blowing puzzle, but stop and think, what would you do if it was your turn? I've mentioned on the channel that I routinely lose to people rated under 300 or even under 200, and I wonder if maybe that's because when I'm playing, just normally, I don't think as hard about my moves, partly because I'm just, having fun playing a game, and partly also because there's a very short time limit in the live games, and there's also a little bit of pressure, whereas you feel like if you spend 3 minutes on every single move, your opponent's going to get mad. But, in the turn-based games, you can take your time and really find a better move. What I would do if I was playing naturally is just be like, all right, let's, move up with the Illusionist and start moving my Hermit and my Cub, shove the Jailer up, call it a day. But there's actually a better move than this, and I think it's an important move to find. I think maybe this entire game really hinges on this next move. You swap the Illusionist with the Hermit, and then you move the Hermit. I actually was hesitating about where to put the leader. Ultimately, I decided to put the leader seemingly paradoxically to the left rather than to the right. Now, what is the point of this Illusionist and Hermit swap? If I just move the Illusionist here, then I can move the Hermit here. So by swapping first, I'm essentially giving up one bit of advancement. And as you know in this game, a single square is everything. The reason I did this is to stop my opponent from being able to advance with the Brewmaster. If the Brewmaster goes here or here, the Illusionist can swap with it, putting it over here where it's going to be completely out of position. Not only is it far from my leader, moving 1 hex at a time as a vanilla piece, but it also doesn't have any of its allies anywhere remotely close to it. So that way I'm able to give up a hex, but in exchange for giving up a hex, I'm potentially giving up a lot more from my opponent, who now is not able to advance this Brewmaster. So what do you do as the opponent? I mean, you could do something like move the claw in, or sorry, not in, move the claw down to get the claw closer to the leader and just, start moving up with your rider and stuff. But with these pieces, the Jailer, the Manipulator, and the Hermit, yes, they're kind of blanks. They're kind of just vanilla pieces, but still, that's 3 pieces that are kind of like on the wrong side of the wall to your leader, and that's a 3-on-2 majority. Whereas my opponent has just the claw and the Brewmaster trying to chase down my leader, but the Brewmaster can't move, and I have a cub for defense. So I felt like I had the advantage with this line. Now my opponent decided to shove up with the rider, of course, and ignore my Illusionist. She just moved the Brewmaster up and moved the claw up. So that's very threatening with those 2 pieces near my leader and only a cub for support. But I'm not sure that you can really get away with this. I think that you had to respect the Illusionist on that key hex and just accept the fact that your Brewmaster couldn't go that turn. By the way, there were no pulling up the Illusionist or pulling up to the Illusionist shenanigans, because remember, the claw was near my Jailer. So the claw couldn't actually fix that situation, and that's part of the Jailer's power. The Jailer, I'm just starting to realize, is a really ridiculous piece, because there are so many situations where it just completely shuts down your opponent. So here, I'm of course going to swap with the Brewmaster, and now I can be pretty aggressive. I'll just move everything up. And maybe this is a bridge too far. I even move up with the Manipulator. The thing about this is I want to make sure that if my opponent goes back here, then I can get checkmate in, or at least have a piece touching, and force either the Assassin or the Rider to be defensive pieces. I felt like I was giving up too much just leaving the Manipulator there. And I decided also to just, completely go aggressive. We're also going to, or not aggressive, sorry, I moved all my pieces. I'm going to just move over here towards the claw, farther away from the Brewmaster. Now, the Jailer, again, is being clutch here, preventing the Rider from moving all the way up here. If the Rider could do that, my move would be much less appealing. But with this, I am able to be pretty safe. Of course, the Rider can move up, but still, I've got a cub to defend against a claw and a Rider. I can also keep the Illusionist back if needed. And if the Rider does go up, then the opponent has the issue of like, well, how are you defending your leader, right? You can only hide back here for so many squares. I didn't calculate precisely, but I judged that with a cub as an extra piece for defense and my opponent's Brewmaster completely out of position and being a totally irrelevant piece, I would get to my leader before she got to mine. So I wasn't afraid of the cub coming up here and starting to be aggressive. Now, what my opponent decided to do is actually really interesting this turn. She stepped up with the Brewmaster, stepped in with the claw, stepped up with the Rider, fine. And then, after thinking very carefully about where to put her leader, she decided to keep it in line with the Illusionist. Now, I thought she would put the leader here. This way, it's out of the way of the Illusionist, and the Assassin is in a perfect blocking position to stop the Manipulator from advancing. Then you hope that the Rider, Claw, and maybe Brewmaster somehow get there before the Jailer and the Hermit can bring it home. But my opponent decided to keep the leader here in line with the Illusionist. So obviously now she has to block it, because if I can swap with the leader, she's going to be in trouble. It's actually kind of interesting. You might say, hang on a minute, Boris. You can't actually swap this leader here, because how are you actually doing checkmate? Your leader's not allowed to stand here. The thing is that if my opponent actually lets me do this swap, what I can do is I can put my Hermit here, and I can put my cub here. Then there is this lane open. I can actually manipulate the claw away, which allows my leader to stand here. It's only then touching my Illusionist. It's the only piece it's touching. And after the swap and my opponent's leader lands there, it'll be checkmate because of my leader and the Hermit. So it's actually kind of a close call. It's not exactly a done deal there, the Illusionist swapping with the leader, but there is a way for me to win. So maybe my opponent could have done something fancy, like done the Assassin moving here. That would have stopped the Manipulator from moving the claw. And then that would have meant that if I swap my leader with my Illusionist with her leader, it actually doesn't checkmate. However, the problem with that is then, of course, I just move up with the Hermit and the manipulator, and then the leader is completely boxed in, and I'm obviously not losing on the next turn. So that's the problem with that line. But then if she can't do that, she does need to block the lane. So she puts the assassin in the way, and at this point I think my opponent just missed my next move. It's puzzle time. What do you do here as the black pieces? All right, so it may look like you cannot swap with the assassin, because then if you're not checkmating this turn, you'll get checkmated by the assassin fueled by the brewmaster. However, there is a way for me to stave off checkmate for just a single turn, and a single turn is all I need. All you have to do is put your hermit and cub here, forming this wall. Then you can tuck your leader in the corner, advance with your manipulator and your illusionist, and obviously in this formation, there's absolutely no way for the leader to avoid checkmate. It's just completely exposed with 3 pieces closing in. Now, maddeningly, the assassin cannot checkmate. The cub is blocking it from doing this with a brewmaster kick. The hermit is blocking it from doing this with a brewmaster kick. And if the assassin tries to go around the pieces, then it is just 1 square too slow. So the hermit and cub, very, very strong characters here. If it was just a single piece, then I would not have been able to do this maneuver. Now, the jailer is once again absolutely clutch here, because the rider could, of course, ride in for checkmate if it wasn't for the jailer, so make sure you don't step up with the jailer. That would be throwing the game away. You don't need to get close to the leader. The leader is definitely an unavoidable checkmate, so just leave the leader there so you don't lose, and the rider is just 1 maddening square also away from checkmate. Also worth noting, the position of the claw is important. If the claw were here, this actually wouldn't work, because then the cub could just step into the lane and the claw could claw it in for checkmate. But as it is, there's absolutely no way for the opponent to use the claw to pull in a piece that's adjacent to my leader. So I had to check this very carefully, checked and double checked, but it does work, and my opponent saw that it works, so she just passed the turn. And then I actually stepped up with my jailer, which is a mistake. I should have swapped with the leader. That would have been the coolest way to checkmate, but instead I stepped up with my pieces and checkmated the boring way. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.